The Alpha King bought an unwanted Omega at auction, then learned who she really was. The auction hall smelled of candle wax and old wood. Torches burned along the stone walls, throwing orange light across rows of noble faces, lords, commanders, and wealthy merchants, all seated in velvet chairs as if they had come to watch a performance. In a way, they had. King Cale Dravenmoor sat apart from the rest. He did not sit in the front rows with the eager bidders. He sat in the upper gallery, alone except for his general, Sorin, who stood 2 steps behind him with his arms folded and his expression unreadable. Cale wore no crown tonight. He did not need one. The way every person in the hall glanced at him and then quickly looked away was crown enough. Cale had not come to the Omega auction because he wanted to. He had come because the noble houses expected him to, and because showing up changed the meaning of the event. If the Alpha King of Ashvale treated this auction like a livestock market, purchased the least wanted person on the list, and walked away without ceremony, the prestige of the whole affair would quietly collapse. That was his plan. Cold. Simple. Effective. He watched the early bidding without interest. Name after name was called. Prices were offered. Men nodded or raised their hands. Cale did not move. Then, near the end of the evening, the auctioneer called the last name on his list. His voice dropped half a note when he read it, as if the name itself were an inconvenience. Lot 22. Female. Age 24. No recorded bond. No documented heat cycle. No confirmed bloodline of status. Offered as general household service only. A low murmur moved through the room. 24 was considered too old. No bond and no cycle meant she was considered broken by the standards of this world. The crowd's interest had already moved toward the exits. The woman who walked onto the low wooden platform was not what Cale expected. He had expected someone frightened, eyes down, shoulders folded inward, that particular stillness of a person who has learned that being small keeps them safe. She was not small. Not in the way that mattered. She was slight in build, with dark hair pulled back from her face and a dress that was plain and too large for her. There was a bruise along her jaw, already fading to yellow. But her eyes, when she lifted them to scan the room, were calm. Not the false calm of someone holding back tears. The genuine calm of someone who was already doing mathematics. She looked at the exits. She looked at the guards. She looked at the seated bidders 1 row at a time. She did not look up at the gallery. Cale leaned forward, just slightly. No bids, the auctioneer asked. The silence in the hall was answer enough. He cleared his throat and began to lower the platform railing, signaling that the lot would be removed unsold. 6 marks, Cale said. His voice did not need to be loud. It carried the way a stone carries when dropped into still water, not with noise, but with consequence. Every head in the hall turned. The auctioneer froze. Sorin, behind Cale, said nothing, but Cale heard the almost imperceptible exhale that meant his general was choosing to stay quiet on purpose. The woman on the platform stilled. Then, slowly, she looked up at the gallery. Their eyes met for less than 3 seconds. Then she looked away first. But in those 3 seconds, Cale noticed something that did not fit. She was not afraid of him. Surprised, yes. Calculating, certainly. But the specific kind of fear that most people wore when the Alpha King turned his attention to them, that animal, instinctive response, was absent from her face. It was the most interesting thing he had seen in months. Sold, said the auctioneer, with poorly concealed relief. Her name, according to the papers she carried, was Mira, a common name, the kind given to children whose families had no great hopes for them. She was assigned to the lower palace staff and given a room no larger than a storage closet near the kitchen corridor. She was told to clean, carry, and stay out of the way. She did all 3. For exactly 1 week. The first report that reached Cale came from his head of palace security, a careful man named Doran who did not come to the king with small concerns. The new servant was found in the restricted library at 3 in the morning, Doran said. She claimed she could not sleep. She was reading a military history of the Third Ashvale War. He paused. Specifically, the chapter covering the Ashenwing campaign. Cale set down the document he was reviewing. The Ashenwing campaign, he repeated. Yes, Your Majesty. The Ashenwing family had been one of the great bloodlines of Ashvale, old, powerful, and gone. They had been wiped out 24 years ago in what the royal records described as a plague that swept through their stronghold in a single winter. No survivors. No heirs. Their estate had been absorbed by the Council of Five, divided and distributed among the noble houses like a cake cut between hungry guests. Which chapter? Cale asked. The one about the siege, Doran said. She had marked her place with a piece of kitchen twine. Cale returned to his documents. But that evening, he did not read them. The second incident reached him not as a report but as a direct witness. He was standing at his study window, reviewing a supply map for the eastern border, when movement in the courtyard below caught his eye. A young child, one of the Beta staff's sons, no older than 4, had climbed the edge of the ornamental fountain and fallen in. The water was only waist-deep on a grown adult, but on a child that small, in early autumn, it was enough. The boy surfaced once, arms flailing. 3 servants were in the courtyard. All 3 froze. The woman Cale had bought at auction appeared from the far archway. She crossed the courtyard in less than 4 seconds. She reached into the fountain, pulled the boy clear, and had him on his feet and coughing water before the nearest guard had finished reacting. Then she knelt to his level, checked his face, and said something quiet that made the child stop crying. She moved too fast. Not in a way that most people would notice, but Cale noticed. He had spent 15 years on battlefields. He knew the difference between a person who ran and a person who moved with training behind them. This woman had training. She was hiding it, but it was there. He called for her the next morning. She came to his study and stood in front of his desk with her hands at her sides and her eyes on a point just above his left shoulder, the posture of a person presenting themselves as harmless. Cale recognized it for exactly what it was. "What is your bloodline?" he asked. "I have none of note," she said. "My family were farmers. 3 generations, no title." "Where?" "The Renwood province. Small holding. Nothing worth recording." "And your name?" She met his eyes briefly. "Mira." It was a clean lie. Not a nervous one. That told him more than the lie itself. He let her go. But he asked Soren to begin looking into the Renwood province records. The third incident changed everything. Lady Mira Coldthorne, a noblewoman of considerable ambition and limited patience, had never liked loose ends. The girl from the auction had refused a bribe, moved too quickly, and spent her nights in the restricted library. These were not the behaviors of a farmer's daughter. Lady Coldthorne did what people with power and no conscience tend to do when something threatens their comfort: she removed it. A royal seal went missing from the administrative wing. The story was prepared in advance. The girl from the auction had stolen it. The witnesses were staff members whose continued employment depended on Lady Coldthorne's goodwill. Cale was informed of the accusation the morning he was due to ride east. 200 soldiers were already assembled in the courtyard below. The eastern border situation had been building for weeks, and delay was costly. He delayed anyway. He heard the accusation. He heard the witnesses. Then he asked the woman standing accused of theft one question: "What would you gain from a seal you cannot legally use?" She looked at him steadily. "Nothing. I cannot sign documents, own property, or make contracts. A royal seal in my hands is a piece of wax. Whoever wants me gone must not have thought very hard about the logic." The room was quiet. Cale turned to Lady Coldthorne. "If you bring false accusations to my attention again," he said, "the consequences will be more interesting than a dismissed charge." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He rode east that afternoon. Before he left, he told Soren in a voice too low for others to hear, the woman from the auction. "No one touches her, reassigns her, or speaks to her without my direct order." Soren said nothing for a moment. Then, carefully, "May I ask why?" "Because someone wants her gone," Cale said, "and I want to know who, and why, before that happens." It was a practical answer. The most honest part of it, the part he did not say aloud, was that his instinct had been telling him something was wrong, or rather, something was significantly right, about this woman since the moment he had seen her standing on that platform, scanning exits like a soldier. She met the elder on a Tuesday, through a baker's boy who carried more than bread. The old woman's name was Marin. She was blind in both eyes and had been for 20 years, but she navigated the outer city's narrow streets with a familiarity that blindness could not explain. She had sent the message. She had been waiting. They sat in a room above a candle shop, and the old woman reached across the table and took both of the young woman's hands without asking permission. "You smell like ash and lightning," Elder Marin said quietly. "You always did. Even when you were 6 years old and they carried you out of the stronghold wrapped in someone else's name." The young woman, who had been calling herself Mira for so long that the name had started to feel like skin, sat very still. "Say it," the elder said. "I don't know what you want me to say. Your name. Your real one." The silence lasted a long time. Outside, the city moved and breathed and did not know that anything important was happening in this small room. "Lyra," she said finally. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Lyra Ashenwing." Elder Marin closed her sightless eyes. "Yes," she said. "Last daughter of the Ashenwing line. Hidden at age 6 by your mother's most trusted attendant when the council moved against your family. Given a false name, a false history, a false designation. Told you were an Omega because an Omega is invisible. An Omega does not threaten anyone." Lyra's hands tightened in the old woman's grip. "And what am I actually?" "You are the same thing your mother was," Marin said. "The same thing her mother was before her. An alpha. Not a common one." The Ashenwing line carried a bloodline strength that the council spent 2 centuries trying to dilute through arranged marriages, and when that did not work, they arranged something more permanent. They killed my family. They thought they did. They missed one. Lyra sat with that for a while. The candle between them burned without flickering. "The king," she said. "What does he have to do with this?" "The Dravenmoor and Ashenwing bloodlines are fated," Marin said simply. Every scholar who studied both families knew it. The bond between them, if it ever formed, would create a ruler so strongly established that no council, no church, no political arrangement could unseat them. The council did not fear your family, child. They feared what your family would become if they ever found their match. Lyra stared at the candle flame. "He bought me for 6 marks," she said. Elder Marin smiled. It was a smile that held 24 years of patience in it. "The bond does not care about market price." Kale returned from the eastern border 4 days early and in a cold fury. The insurgency had been a false alarm, not a rebellion but a deliberate diversion, designed to pull him out of the capital. Someone had manufactured the reports. Someone had wanted him gone from his own palace. He rode through the night with that knowledge sitting in his chest like a stone. He arrived to find Lyra in the care of the palace physician. She had been poisoned. Not dramatically, not with something that stopped a heart quickly and cleanly. With something slower and more specific, an oil worked into the cloth of her sleeping mat that suppressed the body's natural resistance. The physician, a careful and experienced man, told Kale that the compound was extremely rare and extremely targeted. It was designed, specifically, for someone whose natural biology had already been suppressed. It was meant to ensure that whatever she is, the physician said quietly, she would never surface. Kale sat beside her bed. He did not leave. She woke 12 hours later to find the Alpha King of Ashvale in a chair at her bedside, still in his riding clothes, with maps spread across his knee that he was not reading. "You came back early," she said. Her voice was rough. "Someone wanted me gone," he said. "Same someone who wanted you silenced. I thought those 2 things were probably connected." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the ceiling. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I know," he said. She turned her head to look at him. "What do you know?" "I don't know specifics. But I know you have been lying about your name since the day I bought you. You move like someone who trained for years and is working very hard not to show it. Someone tried to poison you in a way that required specialist knowledge, and the Council of 5 sent me a false military emergency to remove me from the capital." He paused. "Whatever you are, Lyra, and I know Mira is not your name, it frightens people with a great deal of power." Her breath caught. Not at the danger. At the fact that he had said her real name. Not Lyra the character she was about to invent, but her name. The one she had whispered in a room above a candle shop. How did you know? She asked. Soren found records. The Renwood province has no farming estates in the region you described. There is also no record of anyone matching your description in the provincial registry going back 30 years. He looked at her steadily. I have been patient. I would like to stop being patient now. She sat up slowly. The physician had left them alone, which she suspected was not an accident. My name, she said, is Lyra Shenwing. She watched his face. She saw the moment he understood. It moved across his expression quietly, like a change in weather, first the recognition of the name, then the weight of its history, then something else entirely that she could not immediately categorize. The Shenwing line was destroyed, he said. They tried, she said. They missed one. The room was very quiet. Outside, the palace moved around them, guards changing shifts, kitchen staff beginning the evening meal, the distant sound of horses in the yard. Normal sounds. The world not knowing that something had shifted. The council, he said. It was not a question. Yes. He was quiet for a moment longer. Then he said, Are you afraid? It was not the question she expected. She thought about it honestly. Of them, she said. Less than I used to be. Of this conversation. Considerably. Something moved in his expression that she had not seen on his face before. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more careful than that. Don't be, he said. The tribunal was held 6 days later, in the great council chamber of Ashvile's palace. The council of 5 sat at one end of the long table. Kale sat at the other. Lyra stood to his right. She had not wanted to stand at his side. She had argued, in the 2 days before the hearing, that her presence would complicate things, that he could handle the council more efficiently without her in the room. Kale had listened to every word of this argument and then told her, with complete calm, that she would be standing at his right hand and that the discussion was finished. She had stared at him. He had stared back. She had come to the tribunal. The council's lawyer began presenting documents, records of the Shenwing name, historical accounts of the bloodline's end, the official records of the so-called plague. His voice was smooth and confident. The story was well practiced. They had been telling it for 24 years. Kale listened without interrupting. When the lawyer finished, Kale opened the file that Soren had assembled over the previous week. He began presenting counter-documents, one at a time, without raising his voice. Bribed officials whose signatures appeared on falsified death records. A church clerk who had altered the registry. The surviving attendant who had carried a 6-year-old girl out of the Shenwing stronghold in the early morning hours before the council's soldiers arrived. The council members exchanged glances. Their lawyer began to speak. Kale held up one hand and the man stopped as if a wall had appeared in front of him. I have one more document, Kale said. He looked not at the council but at Lyra. Would you like to tell them your name, or shall I? The chamber was silent. Lyra looked at the 5 men who had ordered her family destroyed. She had spent 24 years being invisible, being small, being no one. She looked at them one at a time. She let them see her face without the careful blankness she had worn for 2 decades. My name is Lyra Shenwing, she said. Last of my line. And I am standing in this room because the king of Ashvale bought me at an auction for 6 silver marks and then made the mistake of paying attention. The silence stretched. And then the chamber was no longer silent, because something in the air changed, a pressure that had no name in ordinary language but that every wolf-born person in the room felt at the same moment. Something had been held down for a very long time. It was not held down anymore. It was not a loud event. There was no flash of light, no dramatic transformation. But every alpha in the room, including the 5 at the far end of the table, took a half step back without meaning to. Their bodies understood something before their minds caught up. The woman standing at the king's right hand was not an Omega. She had never been an Omega. What she was had been locked away since childhood, and it had just decided that the room was a safe enough place to finally exist. Kale, beside her, did not step back. He turned his head and looked at her with an expression that held no surprise at all. As if some part of him had known from the first moment he had seen her scan a room for exits and decide not to be afraid of him. Well, Soren said quietly, from his position near the door. That explains several things. The council was tried over the following month. The evidence was thorough. The surviving attendant's testimony was recorded by 3 separate clerks and witnessed by the head of the Church of the Moon, who had gone very quiet and very cooperative once it became clear that her institution's own records had been tampered with for 2 decades. The 5 men who had ordered an old bloodline erased because they feared what it would become did not enjoy what followed. Their titles were stripped. Their estates, the ones carved from the Ashenwing lands 24 years ago, were formally returned. Lady Coldthorn, whose family had held a quiet seat on the council for a generation, lost everything she had spent years collecting. She left the capital on a grey morning in November without ceremony. Lyra did not attend most of these proceedings. She was occupied with something she had never been allowed to do before, learning who she was. Not the political version. Not the legal version. The version where she sat in the Ashenwing archive rooms, unlocked for the first time in 2 decades, and read letters written by her mother, looked at sketches drawn by a grandmother she had never met, and learned that the people she came from had been genuinely remarkable in ways that had nothing to do with bloodline politics. Kale gave her space to do this. He was also, during this period, restructuring half of Ashvile's administrative system, which kept him occupied. But on quiet evenings, when the palace settled into the sounds of a building at rest, he would find her in his study. Not by arrangement. Just there. Reading. Or looking out the window at the courtyard below, the same courtyard where she had crossed 4 seconds flat to pull a child out of a fountain and given herself away. One evening, she spoke first. "You paid 6 marks for me," she said. She was looking at the courtyard. "At an auction where no one else would bid." "I was making a political point," he said. "Was that all?" A pause. Kale looked at the fire rather than at her. "No," he said. "It was not all." She turned from the window. "What was the rest of it?" He was quiet for a long time. Kale was not a man who spoke easily about the things that mattered. He had spent 15 years building a reputation as someone whose inner life was either absent or inaccessible. He had found that reputation useful. "You were not afraid of me," he said finally. "Everyone is afraid of me. It is something I stopped noticing years ago because it became constant. And then there you were, on a platform in front of an entire room that was ignoring you, and you were counting the exits, and you looked up at me and you were not afraid." He paused. "I thought about that for weeks. I told myself it was a curiosity. Something to be explained and then filed away." She waited. "It was not a curiosity," he said. Lyra looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, 6 marks is not very much." "No," Kale agreed. "If you had known who I was." "I would have paid the kingdom," he said. His voice was quiet and completely level. Not a declaration. Not a performance. Just a fact, stated plainly by a man who did not say things he did not mean. Lyra turned back to the window. The courtyard below was empty and lit by pale lamps. After a while, she said, "I spent 24 years being no one. I am going to need some time to become someone." "I know," he said. "I am not certain what I am to you. Or what you want me to be." "I know that too," he said. "Take the time. I am not going anywhere." 3 weeks later, the palace held its first formal council session since the trials. The council chamber was rearranged. New appointments had been made, commanders and administrators chosen for their competence rather than their family names. At the head of the long table, where there had always been 1 chair, there were now 2. Both the same size. Both positioned with equal claim to the head of the room. Kale was already seated when Lyra entered. She stopped when she saw the chairs. She looked at him. He looked back. She sat down. The council members, some old and some new, watched this happen and drew their own conclusions. Most of those conclusions were correct. The session began. There was work to do. There was always work to do in a kingdom that had just dismantled a significant portion of its political structure. Lyra had opinions on 3 of the agenda items. She stated them clearly. 2 were adopted. 1 was debated at length and eventually improved by the debate. After the session, walking back through the long corridor toward the study, Soren fell into step beside her and said, without preamble, I had my doubts about you. I know, Lyra said. I was wrong, he said. Then he walked ahead, which was as much of an apology and a welcome as Soren ever offered anyone. Lyra walked the rest of the corridor alone. The palace around her was the same stone and glass and torchlit air it had always been. But it felt different now. Not smaller, and not larger. Just, known. A place she had the right to understand. Outside the study door, she stopped. Inside, she could hear the sound of Kale reviewing documents, the specific rustle of a man who reads with his whole attention and forgets to be quiet about it. She opened the door and went in. The fire was burning. The maps were spread across the desk. He looked up, and the expression on his face, quick, unguarded, something he had not bothered to hide, told her everything she needed to know about where things stood between them. She sat in the chair across from his desk. He pushed a cup of tea toward her without being asked. They worked until the fire burned low. It was, in every way that mattered, exactly enough. End.